and welcome back to the Canadian Ruck. This pod, we have Canadian legend Gareth Rees on. Very excited to talk to Gareth. This is going to be an amazing pod with Gareth. As always, if you want to contact us, please feel free to use Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or email. Twitter, we're at Canadian Ruck. On the gram, we're _Canadian_Ruck. Facebook at the Canadian Ruck, and our email is thecanadianruck@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out if you have any thoughts. Watch, listen, follow, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Google Podcasts, and CastBox. We have lots of different ways for you to watch and listen to our program. I want to give some shout outs, some feedback. I want to say thanks to Troy Skippy Dixon of the St. John Trojans. He's reached out a few times and offer some thoughts, as is a couple of Rovers, Joel Hodo McConkey and Alex Ginge McQuinn. Thanks very much for your feedback, boys. Same as Blake Edwards of the Fredericton Loyalists and Eves Pellerin of the Black Tie. They've all kind of reached out recently and, offered some nice words and encouraging words. And for that, you five have your name entered now in for a ballot to win one of the new Canadian Rock hats when they arrive. So last pod, I had a bunch of Blau Rovers on, some of my old mates, and the pod kind of went a little bit all over the place, but we were talking a lot about how to improve the game in Canada, and particularly in New Brunswick. And a few things we came up with that, we found some problems. We tried to figure out, let's find if we can find some ways to improve. One of the biggest one is cost-effective insurance for players, be it at the club level, the school level, the rookie rugby levels. As we stated, middle school rugby is now non-contact only because insurance companies or schools don't want to pay insurance companies because the fees are becoming a little bit high. And it's understandable, but it's also a shame. Same as rookie rugby levels. For me to run my rookie rugby program, it was going to be between, over $3,000 for 60 kids to play non-contact rugby from age 5 to 11, 5 to 12. And if I want to start an under 14 program, which is contact, then the price goes up. And that's a lot of money to be asking parents to shell out. It works out between $50 to $80 a kid. Our program only charged $40 a kid. And with that, they used to get insured. They would get a jersey. They would get a water bottle. They would get a rugby ball. They would get 6 to 8 training sessions. They would get 2 jamborees. They would get healthy snacks after each training session. And also usually some type of pizza or barbecue after the jamborees. And now, with insurance levels skyrocketing, they want to, the price is going to have to double for that to even be optionable. So that needs to be looked into for sure. Other things we talked about too is like many major rugby nations, New Zealand's, the South Africas, the Englands, the Irelands, their clubs develop like junior teams. So, you'd have a rookie rugby, U14, U16, U18, that you've got to start early. You definitely have to get the grassroots levels involved. If that can happen, if you can get those clubs starting those programs where kids can tie in, and Loyalists have a rookie rugby program, Moncton has one, St. John does, so the start and the bases are there. But that can develop a sense of club, right? Players are going to want to spend more time there. They're going to want to keep coming back. It helps those players want to carry on traditions as they grow older. For other people to take over the program, take over coaching. And you're also building lifelong members. That's something you definitely need in order for rugby to remain viable. Another option we talked about is, making sure clubs help out with the school areas of the junior age teams. There's a lot of fine rugby players in the province, and I think at the rookie rugby level, the U14, U16 level, we definitely need more help. We need more expert hands and eyes on those focused practices. And it would be awesome if, players could give up an hour of their week or an hour every couple of weeks to come out and lend that supporting role. Another thing we kind of talk about too, with rugby in New Brunswick, is you have kind of the A division, and then that's it. After high school, there's an A division for club rugby. So a lot of these high school kids, they don't know if they have a place to go after that. So maybe there needs to be a focus on a B division. That way players coming out of high school can jump in and continue to play B. Maybe some guys in their late 30s can still play a few years and more and stay involved. So if there's a way that you can make a viable B division, not just A, and you could have 4 or 5 clubs in the province, that would be very beneficial to those trying to keep rugby happening in our province. Saying that, I'd like to give a shout out to some great past present New Brunswickers who could have played Major League Rugby. Uh, with these names here, we could definitely have just a New Brunswick team alone. These are alphabetical order by area. So you start with Blau Rovers. I'm going to give hats off to some of my old mates. First one is my brother Pat Gray, strapping 8-man. Then you have Chris McMillan. He was just a beast of a flanker. Ben Grant, one of the most naturally strongest people I've ever met playing second row. Jarrell McDonald kicking field goals from 60 yards out. Cameron Pope, Crud is an amazing talent, very smart, very crafty. Brad Kierster played Team Canada U19. Sonny Urquhart was a beast of a player. Steve Gillies, probably one of the most powerful runners I've ever seen. And of course, our two national players, Cole Keith and Chauncey O'Toole. Charlotte County, I've heard a lot of stories of this. Chris Hoffman, beast of a player, very intimidating. You get the Fredericton Loyalists. There's some other ones that were pretty impressive. You have Brian Jones, Simon Pacey, probably one of the top 3 to 5 New Brunswickers ever to play rugby. Chris and Scott Ayan, Scott McAfee, Jebby Sinclair, who played for Team Canada. We've had him on a pod. And John Marino kind of bounced back and forth between the Loyalists and the Trojans and a variety of other high-level rugby. Moncton Black Tide, a couple names came out, but a few of them all voted for like a Tim Alien Forsyth and Mike Schomburg. I remember Schomburg playing 8-man for the Black Tide, and man, he was very, very intimidating and hard to bring down when he wanted to go. And it appears the Trojans have a massive list of players. They've had a long storied past. You got a guy like a Nicky Boyle and Cameron New, but you also have Justin O'Toole, Chauncey's brother. You have the Henry brothers themselves. There's also like a Sean McDonald and a Neil Gabriel and Nino Cassetta. Lots of top end players there. Aiden McCormick, John Gould, Jerry Pino, Greg Hawk Horgan, who's now coaching Donnie Patterson. Man, that guy he's still a beast. When you see him, he's still an intimidating guy. You wouldn't want to see him running at you down the pitch with the ball. And John McClatchy, like there's been some great names all the way around. And you want to give your shout outs to the Graham Beckinghams and the Dave McPhersons and the Malcolm McAfees and all those guys that have had input into these players' lives and careers growing up. And I know there's many others that probably could have made a go at it if times were different, if circumstances were different, if there was Major League Rugby back in the 90s. Would have been a lot of these players would have been gone, and we would not have seen them in New Brunswick. But we need players like these to start stepping up in our community clubs now to help the game grow, to help the game survive, and to help the game thrive again. So if you're listening, boys, make sure you jump on with a club and help out. You may be past your playing days, but maybe you can help out at practices and draw some attention and draw some more players into those programs. And coming up next is Gareth Rees. Sit back, enjoy, crack a beer, and enjoy a great conversation with a great rugby legend. Today we welcome Gareth Rees, arguably Canada's best ever rugby player. Gareth ended up with 55 caps, 23 of those as captain. He kicked his way to 491 test points, appeared in 4 Rugby World Cups with Canada, 87, 91, 95, 99. And 91, of course, is when the Team Canada went to the quarters and lost to New Zealand. Played close to 100 matches in Europe. First Canadian inducted into the World Rugby Hall of Fame back in 2010. First rugby player inducted in Canada Sports Hall of Fame in 2014, something Gareth is very fond of. It's a true pleasure to talk to Gareth, and I hope you enjoy this podcast. All right, so welcome back to the Canadian Ruck. We're fortunate, lucky to have Gareth Rees on today with us. Gareth's Canada's probably best player ever at rugby and one of Canada's top athletes of all time. So Gareth, it's an honor and privilege to have you on. Welcome.
Well, great. Thanks for having me. First of all, great to be on the Ruck, and we've all got a little time on our hands. These are strange times we're in, but good getting some rugby stories out there and highlighting some of the great Canadians that have played our game. And I think it's something we haven't always done well in the past. So good job on getting some of the stories up. And
appreciate it. All right, so let's jump right in. So I spoke on a previous podcast with Jeb Sinclair, Chauncey O'Toole, and Cole Keith. Is there a way to rectify the Canadian Super League, kind of like New Zealand does with their super teams, where they kind of send funding down, they kind of send guidelines and coaching structures there could be 3 different divisions. What are your thoughts there? Is the geography too hard, or is that something that could happen?
I think something like the Rugby Canada Super League that used to exist would be the ideal. But there's certain realities you got to check out. First of all, even in New Zealand, that competition doesn't pay for itself. What it has to do with. Let's not forget that the original Super League, a city-based team, 10 teams, great that those cities could get behind rugby. That was funded largely by airline sponsorship deal, Canada 3000. JMS Leckie, a great man from Shawnigan, who supported that and put free flights in. That's what made that league work. So anytime you're running a competition pathway, a program for athletes, it's got to be paid for. So the expense of putting together a citywide competition would be prohibitive at the moment. Don't know if we have enough quality players too for that to take that step. You mentioned Jeb Sinclair, Chauncey O'Toole, and Cole Keith, all from your region out there out east. Those guys benefit from playing in the regional teams against the very best. He's obviously younger and is a bright star, but he needs the best competition he can get to be a great Canadian player and to be a top-class pro. So that's something we got to keep our eye on. And the MLR and the Arrows is doing a good job providing him that opportunity. With Chauncey and Jeb, they had different pathways, and no question the rugby they got out of New Brunswick and their clubs in that region take the next steps. So we have to try and provide that. Whether the Super League is something we can pay for at this stage, I would say no. There isn't enough corporate interest. There isn't enough money to defer those huge would involve a 10-city citywide competition.
Fair enough. There's also some talk about this Rugby Club World Cup potential between Super Rugby, Premiership, Pro 14, and maybe MLR teams, things like that. What are your thoughts there? What's the chance of that happening?
Obviously, a lot of people got a lot of time on their hands and their computers, creating some thought-provoking models. It's been talked about. The reality is that the World Rugby, and again, these are business decisions, these are corporate decisions. World Rugby and the unions that are funded by their international competition. The game is funded by the World Cup, which is the 3rd largest sporting event in the world and creates massive amounts of money. And the unions, especially the bigger unions, are funded by their international competition, whether that's the Six Nations or the Tri-Nations competitions down south. That's what funds the game. That's what funds a large part of the club competition and the TV contracts. So other than France and England, the professional clubs are not owned. They're all owned by the unions. So they're going to be, I think, less interested in having a world club competition. Clubs drive that sometimes. You saw Bernard Laporte, my old counterpart I used to play against for France and at Begle in France. He's come up with that. He's stirring the pot a little bit. Relationship. In many ways, the French clubs aren't even a part of the French Federation. So there's a lot to work through there. I suppose it's symptomatic. The Champions League and the World, I suppose, are great to watch in soccer, but they haven't really taken off. When you look at a World Cup or European Cup, is still the pinnacle of the game. So I'd be surprised if it took off, but it is food for thought, things that gets people thinking about how the game is really funded and how we're structured.
Absolutely. Yeah, like you said, I think France and England, they're owned individually by business owners, individual people, and everywhere else it's kind of club-based, based off the national teams.
Yeah, but even those individual owners in France and England benefit from the union's television deal that pays a lot of the bills. That's the reality of the business of professional rugby.
I was always a fan of the Churchill Cup. So the Churchill Cup's been out since about 2011. I've always been a fan of that. Is that something that can come back? Or what about like America's tour, kind of similar to the British and Irish Lions, where you have maybe Canada, US, Argentina, and Uruguay facing off against like UK teams, something like that? Is that something that could even happen?
Yeah, the loss of Churchill Cup to me is really, the timing would be so perfect for us. So the Churchill Cup had kind of 3 prongs to it. One at the top was matches that we needed. We desperately needed high-level matches. And those were against English teams and American teams. And then we had some invited teams. But it was also on a corporate level owned wholly by Canada, US. And then underneath it was what we put in place was refereeing and coaching development and interaction with England to make all those components better. So it is the perfect model. Unfortunately, for some, didn't come off. So quite sad. Again, we're looking in the past, but that model would be great. If we could get competition in some form like we had New Zealand Maori come in, we had Scottish teams. If we get competition, which I know Kingsley Jones and our performance staff want that, I mean, that would be great. If we could get help for refereeing and coaching, that again is a massive need. Also, if we could have a corporate vehicle, some way to make money, and something we owned, which we did have in that tournament, that's a big need for us to spend it on the game and in the growth of the game.
So to grow the game, one great way would be host the World Cup in North America. How does that happen?
There have been some early discussions, I believe, happens in conjunction with the United States. But again, even though they've had their troubles in the last few weeks and a few things have come to a head, they do still have the market. They do still have the tele base. They do still have a corporate base that very few countries in the world can duplicate. So that's the initial discussion. One of the realities of in the next couple of quads, a lot of competition. Again, this is a pure business decision, not a rugby decision, whether it's the FIFA World Cup or the Olympics out of LA. I mean, there's a lot of competition for corporate dollars, for dollars. Some negatives there. That said, we saw it in soccer when the U.S. hosted the Soccer World Cup. It launched the game of soccer as a pathway for us to have it as a kind of a dream or a stepping stone to become professional athletes in that sport. So I think it would be a great thing to, of course, host the Women's World Cup. And, I'm very proud of that we brought that to Edmonton. I called the final in 2006, and, my involvement with the women's game goes way back. And to see, an opportunity when within a shorts grab by an English player of our star player to get into a World Cup final back then. And we saw what it launched and what the women have done in recent years, especially in the 15s, to get to a World Cup final. And, that you got to take those smaller steps before you can get the big moments like we had over in France with that great women's team. So, obviously, no question it would inspire rugby. Again, whether on a corporate and membership level, we're ready to launch, to be discussed, and some discussions have taken place.
That's awesome. That would be absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
There's a variety of cities that could play host, kind of like, was it 99, I think or 91 or 99, where it was kind of spread across some different UK countries. Definitely could probably work between the States and Canada for sure. Let's look at you individually a little bit. You played in 4 World Cups, first ever in 87. You played 91, 95, 99. What do you remember for those events, like the atmosphere, the games, the different locations? Like, how, as a young player in 87 to a seasoned veteran in 99, walk us through a little bit of your thought process in those times.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that's kind of the pinnacle time, but everyone forgets, I had been selected by Gary Johnson. I was a youngster. Hans Goody was our captain with Spence McTavish. Awesome for me in my development as a rugby player to be playing with some Roe Heinsohn's guys, Mark White, who had put into the game. But everyone forgets the World Cup as an entity didn't exist. No one knew what it was. A lot of people said it would lead to professional. Actually did. So we're going into the unknown down in New Zealand and Australia. That said, what an opportunity for Canada. And I think that's gone on. It's the way we measure the thing we focus on every 4 years. But we got to play with Tonga, Ireland, and Wales in our pool. And, things like, we had a tough pack. We worked incredibly hard. Some would say, guys through our paces, a lot of contact and training. With 3 days were normal. I mean, there's a story of us staying in the same hotel in Auckland before the opening dinner. We were coming up in the team hotel from our second practice of contact with one more to come that day under Gary, and the Scots were coming down the elevator to have their one and only practice. We worked hard. I'd broken my finger before the first test match. Guys that were out. John Robertson was out with a bad knee. Well, he wasn't out, but one thing Gary Johnson did do is he said we're going to be the toughest team, and I don't think he was wrong.
Yeah.
No, we ran out of gas in the 2 big games we had in Wales and Ireland, leading at the half. But what an opportunity to take on the world, and it really kind of defined the Hanses team that, for me as a person in my rugby career, that I really wanted to show the world what Canadians could do. Forget my Welsh name accents, that were around us. This was about Canadians being defiant and showing the world. And that kind of set me up for the rest of my rugby career, whether it was as a pro player, whether as a pro coach, or even that we wanted to show the world what we could do. And rugby was going to be the vehicle. So, a privilege for me, and I learned so much there.
That's awesome. Yeah, like 87 was a great World Cup. 91, you made it to the quarters. 95 and 99, just a couple of little breaks here and there, but you guys were, those 4 World Cups, probably the top World Cups that, in my opinion, Canada has been a part of. Hopefully we'll get back to that.
Yeah. I mean, the quarterfinal, again, I work with the current players, and at times I understand that people talk about those. I mean, the only reason it's relevant is because it was a great, I think the irrelevant point was that group of players believed they could take on anyone. They actually believed, even though we were massive underdogs in a quarterfinal against New Zealand All Blacks, that we had every right to be on the field. That Haka, yep, Haka's part of it, but we were there to front up, to get in their faces and make life difficult for them. And a few bounces go our way, and we get a famous win. I know the world is different and has changed, but it was that attitude that I'd like to see. We talked about Cole Keith off the top, and some of our current players. You look at DTH, Van der Merwe, or Tyler Ardrum. I think they have elements of that attitude. It's like, give me on anyone in the world. And hopefully the likes of Cole, the younger guys coming up, they get a bit more of that attitude where it's like, if I do the work as a Canadian, there's no reason I should back down from anyone in the world. That's always been important to me. And Kingsley Jones, our current head coach, and Jamie Cudmore, who coaches our Pride. Jamie's obviously got that in spades. He lived that his whole life and went to France, and he didn't back down from anyone. But also, I think mentally, he was about taking Canada somewhere. And Kingsley has the same pride, and he's worked really hard on the Canadian culture and the need for us to have that don't take a backseat attitude. And it's a long, hard thing to work on. But I see Kingsley working hard on that with our current players.
That's awesome. That's definitely needed. You got a good crop of players, and it just need the right guy shepherd them along the way. All right, so talk to us what it meant to you to be inducted into Canada's Sports Hall of Fame. That's a pretty big feather in your cap.
Yeah, I guess when you get old, you get all these little accolades, the Hall of Fames, and this and that. But for me, the Canada Sports Hall of Fame was really it was quite emotional because it was a defining moment. Again, Halls of Fames and a little bit of recognition here and there. First of all, I'm in a team sport, but secondly, for me, it really showed what this generation of players the teams I got to play, I got to go, and the higher ranked teams that we beat over the years. It really defined that the rest of Canada was seeing what we did. Obviously, as the individual, as the kicker, as player who got some recognition, it was going through my name, but absolutely no doubt that that was a recognition for that group of men who had taken us somewhere. One kind of standing up there, with Wayne Gretzky in the room and a Hall of Fame that, Terry Fox, and people like that are inducted into. As a kid, I was a huge sports fan. But for me to be taking, not only myself and my family, it was a great moment for my parents and my family and my friends who were all sports mad. But to take those and rugby game, all over this country, there's people running rugby programs, there's people providing opportunities. To take them to that stage was the end of a journey for me, like a marking point in a journey where we took rugby to that point and the whole nation was watching. And thank you to Canada for seeing the efforts and the achievements that team did. You see our women doing it now. You see our Olympians trying to do the same thing. I really think those are important journeys. Obviously, our Olympians have had a really tough month or so here, where their preparation is going to be postponed. But that same attitude about being on a journey, being on a pathway, I think is totally relevant. And maybe the Canada Sport, us being recognized for the journey that we had completed and undertaken, and what we did with a red jersey on with a maple leaf on our chest, that was one of the highlights of my young life.
That's great. Just like you said, those other people in there, the Terry Foxes, the Wayne Gretzkys, and just standing shoulder to shoulder with those guys it's I guess makes you really sit back and appreciate everything that you've done with your teammates. Absolutely.
And I was fortunate in that room. There were some of my teammates and coaches, Dr. Parfrey, obviously Ian Burtwell and Gary Johnson couldn't be there. But we were, rugby people would be happy to know, the last ones to leave, and we were asked to leave. As we were a group of us, some of them in the famous Red Blazers, were asked to clear out and get on to the next. We thought we wanted to stay and celebrate. So, yeah, we did it in style, but it was pretty cool, and a moment I won't forget.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Back in 2011, so 9 years ago, you were also the first Canadian inducted into the Rugby World Hall of Fame, and the first player from a non-Tier 1 nation. Talk to us about that, what that means to you.
Well, first, viewed ourselves as Tier 2, sorry. That was never a term I ever used. I don't think you can take the field believing you're a tier below another nation. Obviously, we have our challenges, and I'm fully aware of them. So, but I understand how World Rugby works. That was a great moment. Again, to be in that room with, John Olomu was inducted, I think, at the same time. Francois Pinard, some of the World Cup winners. That was great, again, for Canadian rugby. And it was my teammates that were being recognized again. But these are the little steps that I don't think we should take for granted, as so much is going on in rugby, whether it's the advent of the Olympics in Canada, whether it's the changing opportunities on the world stage, whether it's pro contracts for our players, how hard it is to get a pro contract. We have to keep taking all these steps, and whether part of that is someone getting recognized in the World Hall of Fame, maybe that inspires a kid who's playing hockey or basketball in high school. Maybe that inspires a kid to say, hey, maybe one day I'll go in. But I do believe that's part of the journey, is to tell our stories and inspire kids, and to be as good as we can be. So, that was awesome to fly down and be recognized. Again, those moments, those external, you get a plaque or you get a trophy, are about events, and hopefully the opportunity it represents to other people on their way out.
Absolutely. I think we'll talk about that in a little bit too, about pathways, or lack of a better term, about when kids finish high school playing rugby, like, where do we go? Do we stop playing? Are there other areas and other avenues? And I think we're going to get into that a little bit later on. Right now, just going to take a quick break. We're going to talk about just a quick fire portion of this. I'm just going to read you a sentence, and you have to say, first thing that comes to mind when you hear the phrase, sort of.
Okay.
So, best team you ever faced?
Munster at Thomond Park in professional rugby got hammered when the Wasps went there. I had a shocker of a game, and those guys at their very best that make it very difficult to play at Thomond Park in Ireland.
Fair enough. Best player you ever faced?
Again, I like to bring it local. Mark Wyatt was a guy who created a huge incredibly hard to play against. So he was a guy that I always give a shout out to. The other guy I'll say is Hugo Porta, the Argentinian fly half and a legend.
Toughest player you ever faced?
Again, the Canadians, both Al Sharon and Gordon McKinnon, were a complete pain in the ass. They were there, and they, as a fly half, I guess they made me better, but they were brutal to play against. They covered a lot of ground, and once they got you, they made you hurt. So, on the global stage, there's a few guys I didn't like. Both Michael Jones and Zinzan Brook were, again, great athletes that didn't give you any space to relax. So, there's a few guys over the years that made life difficult.
All right. Chips or cookies?
I like chips. I like my chips.
What kind?
Green ketchup, obviously, being a good Canadian boy.
All right. Ham or turkey?
Oh, definitely turkey. My wife loves ham. It drives me nuts. Turkey all day.
Favorite beer?
Say that again.
Favorite beer?
Cold one.
It doesn't matter.
No. I got to give Molson a shout out. They put me through university I worked for them. But also Labatt. Honestly, Labatt, for years I drank alcohol because they sponsored a bunch of the rugby tournaments that I got to go and play in across Canada. And Steve Gray's old man used to have a fridge full, but every time we went to Ottawa, that's important.
Fair enough. What's your guilty pleasure?
Wow. Guilty pleasure. I don't know. It's not very sick. What do I like? Geez, that's a tough question. Um, I don't know. Honestly, can't think. Maybe a nice bottle of red and some foie gras and a nice steak.
That's a good one.
Not too sexy, but that's what I like.
What's your best place for a post-match beer?
Basement drinking is important. Any place that you can get a group of guys around the circle. You don't need to have windows in that room.
Yeah,
Either a garbage bag or a box full of cold beer
yeah.
and chairs you can put in a circle and just get some good stories out there. Still, some of my best moments have been that. Even though there's ballrooms all over the best hotels in the world where you're supposed half the time you'd rather be with your best mate sitting in a basement somewhere and with a box of beer, just telling stories.
I agree. What series are you binge watching right now?
Oh, geez. I went through the girl from the UK. What the hell is it called? Oh, awesome. Oh, damn it. Forgotten the name of it.
As long as you don't say
It's
Tiger
on
King.
Showtime. I'm not watching Tiger King. I got 8 and 9-year-old boys. I did watch the movie about two brothers, the Tigers. But what the hell is the woman called? You're going to have to edit. Her name, geez, it's bugging me. I'll come back to it.
All right, we'll move on. That's okay.
I'll figure it out. Yeah.
Favorite movie?
I like me a little bit of Au revoir les enfants to give you a bit of culture. I like Breaker Moran, amazing South African movie. Chariots of Fire is up there. I like some good old classics, but I also like a rom-com, as my wife will tell you, and it's kind of sad, kind of.
Who would play you in a Netflix movie of your life?
Of my life or on the field? I don't know. Matt Damon's already done Francois Pinard. Got one of those look-alike things from him, or Ben Affleck, his buddy, way back when I was a pro. So maybe we'll give Ben a chance at playing rugby player.
Sounds good. At last, who had the biggest impact on you as a player?
I think I'd have to say my old man, Alan Rees. He obviously was a very, very good player himself. Played pro soccer as well. Was a great athlete, but he and my mom obviously supported my dream to play sports. He kind of got me off grade 10, grade 11 were my defining years, I think, where I learned so much, and then put that into place when the likes of Gary Johnson, Ian Burtwell asked me to play ball for Canada. Without the kind of the groundwork that Dad put in place, I think life was a rugby lesson, whether it was driving to school or actually coaching on the field. Taught me some stuff that taught me a level of toughness that I probably didn't get from Dad, and I took that in. And then Ian Burtwell taught me a level of how to think outside the box. And then Dr. Parfrey later on, Pat, was again just thought about the game a little differently and different challenges as I got older and tried to become a leader in the game. Learned a lot from him.
That's awesome. All right, so a few questions left to finish off. So what are your thoughts on what makes a great team player?
I think it's commitment, knowing that the guy's there, knowing the guy's on your shoulder, good or bad, on or off the field. I do important. I know the world is sterilized a bit more than it was. So something like an altercation in a pub or, something that happens off field, I felt that the best had that on or off the field, the guys were there beside you. But the same thing needs to happen on the field. Resilience is a word that I think is so important. I mentioned our Olympic athletes just had some really, so it's the real test of them as people, how resilient they are. If they're going to be thrown off by certain decisions that are out of their control. And the Canadian teams that I played on that were good were super resilient. Obviously they were sometimes inspired by the way we were treated and didn't get the respect we deserved, but it's what you did with that. So I love players that were resilient and channeled that anger. Not only were they there on your shoulder when you needed them, but also were positive in the way they channeled that anger into performance.
Nice. So you come from a city in south of BC. BC's always been one of the top provinces to produce Canadian rugby players. What can the rest of the country do to kind of catch up?
Oh, I think the days are gone where the country's not caught up. I think Ontario produces more players. And, the days of the huge advantages we had in BC of the weather and all that, I think a lot of those are gone. Obviously, there's still good programs in BC, but yeah, I think you look at what Ontario's done over their development of their youth programs, they've probably gone past That said, I don't think the principles are any different. One of the things that has changed massively when I grew up in BC playing ball here, the influence of touring sides before the game went pro was huge. But
Yeah.
every year as a young men's player, I would play against the British champions, the Harlequins, the Wall, these kind of teams that were world class and had full of England players on a club tour. That's changed and has changed for some time. So that isn't part of the model anymore, where we used to get that kind of so you can get a bit isolated. I think it's happened in the BC Premier League, although it's a solid competition. The gap between the pro leagues in Europe or the top teams in New Zealand or Australia is bigger than when, and that's a challenge for us to keep that. Now the MLR is going to address some of that. I think it's a mid-level where you got some of the best players in the continent playing against each other, but BC game on the field out of doors. But I think getting some good athletes involved. We mentioned Chauncey and Jeb off the top. Those are great players that don't come from a so-called traditional, but they did have great clubs with good ethoses and enough of a connection to the Canadian national team and the game, so that those kids saw a pathway. Kids, Jeb and Chauncey, but they were able to have a journey on that pathway. I think that's what's important in Canadian rugby, is at least for them to see these great athletes, to see an opportunity.
Yeah, so like Jeb was a Fredericton Loyalist, Chauncey and Cole both played for the Black Rovers. Good clubs out here in New Brunswick.
Do you get paid? Do you get paid for that plug there?
No.
I know Belle Isle pays big money.
not since I left,
Yeah.
Speak to us about some different, issues within Rugby Canada right now. So I've got 6 or 7 here. So what are your thoughts on the Canadian Sevens success right now?
Well, as an event, the Canadian men's and women's sevens, obviously the women's sevens in Langford is great to have an event. The athletes love it. It's smaller, but it's something that we really need to grow. I'd love to see that event be in the world, to put a women's event in a big stadium and get 10 or 20 or 30,000 people just there for women's sevens. We've done the first steps, I think, in Langford, getting 5,000 people to watch women's sevens, and provide a tournament in a smaller community where those women are the focus. And I think they deserve that, whether it's the local media or the public, about those women elite athletes and that have gone to the Olympics. And I think that's great to build that. The men's sevens event out of Vancouver, to me, it was the perfect storm. I've been involved right at the beginning with John Furlong, and it was the perfect storm. One, that stadium is remarkable in BC Place. It's comfortable, which you need for a 2-day sevens event where you've got 8 hours of viewing. Corporately, it provides the opportunity to make money. In terms of the city and the location and the destination, the timing was right for our corporate partners. Just the perfect storm that we brought this event. We could celebrate their love of rugby with this great event that they couldn't do previously, when we had maybe 1 off 15 matches every 3 or 4 years in a community. So that said, those events are great. I mean, the growth of the game and all the other aspects of the game are largely funded by the success of the Canada Sevens out of Vancouver. So that's just our reality. And it's the event. It's the fact that our men's team can do what they did this time. That's one of the reasons when we had our first conversation with John Furlong, probably 7 years ago now, that was one of the goals, was to provide an environment where our athletes could win the Olympics in 2010. He provided an environment on home soil where athletes could win gold medals, and Canada never won a gold medal at their own Olympics before. He did that, and I think we saw a couple of weeks ago the kind of that coming to fruition. 5 years in, we got a place where Canada in a weekend beat Fiji, beat South Africa. Usually you're playing for gold if you can get that done. They beat South Africa in a medal match. That's something that we had hoped for all those years ago, and credit the athletes for getting that done, but also credit the tournament for creating that. So I think Sevens has been an up and down ride, funding involved, and how we chase those dreams of the Olympics without impacting the 15s, which is a bigger funder of the game across the country. So I think we learned a lot in the last 2-3 years, and some of the attitudes we have around how we work together with those two programs and develop players.
So you spoke a few times there, you said funding. So what is the challenge of funding for 15s, for sevens, for men's, women's?
Well, the challenge for funding in rugby is not enough money. One of the challenges when sevens came online as Olympic sport, that we now had different partners, whether which is the Olympic pathway funder through the government, and some other athlete support, that because it's an Olympic sport, that's how the Canadian government or the Canadians viewed it. So at one point, we really penalized players for choosing 15s. Type 5 players couldn't get any money, whereas backs and loose forwards that maybe could justify playing in the Olympics would get full funding. So that was a reality we had to face, and we almost didn't make the last World Cup. And that's when we really opened our eyes to say, we have to prioritize 15s. We have to develop athletes, not only for the sevens. We were just developing sevens athletes for almost a generation there. We have to develop 15s players. So again, we've learned some hard lessons. And, when you see Theo Sauter step on the field, these are players that have been part of the Pride, part of the centralized combined sevens and 15s program. They've been prepared, Endrico and Sauter playing a 15s World Cup down in Japan. Then they go over and they contribute to Canada's success on the HSBC Sevens World Series. That is the model that must exist in Canada. We can't have seven specific athletes that don't contribute. We're not saying that you jump from week to week becoming a sevens athlete and a 15s athlete. We're saying that the development, the core skills, what a player needs to learn to be world class, there's only a certain percentage that becomes special into sevens or 50, become a good core player, whether it's your nutrition, your physical development, your core skills. That all has to happen. And then you can serve both codes of the game if you wish. You can become a specialist. You can get an MLR, a European pro contract. That's all on the horizon. But there's no reason why an 18-year-old kid should become just a sevens player or just a 15s player if they've got the attributes we need. So we learned a ton there. It's real positive, and those two players right there, Sauter and Co, great examples of athletes that I think are going to serve this country in one way or the other over the next decade or so, and the players, great young people as well.
Absolutely. It's part of the cost of staying competitive, right? Where we're a small country population-wise, only 35 million, and a small portion of that plays rugby. So in order for both programs to be successful, they need to kind of cross between boundaries, some of the players.
Yeah, and the flip side of that is, don't forget that our greatest sevens players, well, Phil Mack, who's now retired, but and Nathan Hirayama and Harry Jones, they as really world-class sevens players through the 15s game as well. They travel the world, playing in World Cups, and now they apply that on both of those players, principally in the last 3 or 4 years, the World Series, HSBC Sevens World Series. They are better players on that series because of their 15s experience as well. Let's not forget that. So, I do think we got to have a healthy, open discussion about that. On the men's side, the women's side is a little bit different because the funding is so skewed because of the potential for the women to win a medal within the current environment of sevens, because of what they did in Rio and bringing home some hardware. That was a great job done by that set of women and John Tate. But the funding is, it's black and white as to where that funding in terms of on the podium. Now we do have more support for the women's 15s game at university level, which is something we're hoping to grow and change on the men's side. But the university women being recognized as a full championship sport has been really important. Again, all those women that went to Rio and brought home medals for us, the Kelly Russells of this world, they were fully supported by U Sport in the side game to stay involved in the sport and to develop as athletes. So when the time came and the Olympics came calling, they went down there, were well supported by on the podium, and one step away from a gold medal, but produced a bronze medal, which is famous for Canadian rugby.
Yeah, like the women in sevens and 15s, amazing. I think we're ranked 3rd in the world for both. And unfortunately, our men's has kind of dropped to 23rd on the 15 side. What's the difference there? Is it just there's more women playing, or is it a combination of men's, that, as you said before the World Cup, some were focused on sevens, some were
of our membership.
15s. Sorry?
I've lost you there, but
sorry.
May have lost you on the internet, but I'll go again. So we have a fantastic record on the women's side that 50% of our membership. And that shouldn't be a surprise. It has been a priority for our leaders in the game for almost 20 years now. You know, you go back to the late Monty Heald, who was a chairman, said that was important. It's appropriate the Women's Fund is named after him. Barry Giffen, a chairman, again, in the global community, it wasn't popular to say that women's rugby is important. And our leaders did, Steph White and her first team that went on the field, and a group of women, Liz Ferguson, that really fought some battles for the women's game, broke down those male stereotypes, and we got results, and women's rugby has been a priority in Canada. It's always been, there's been an opportunity, and so it's a fantastic journey that we've been on. So in some way, when the women's global game is now starting to explode, you know, we should be at the forefront. We've made some really good decisions, all our policies in place. 40% of our board at Rugby Canada, the people who decide how we're going to spend our money and stuff in Canada, what are our priorities, must be made up of one of the genders. So a minimum 40% men or a minimum 40% women, which is a great gesture. Reality, there will be female input at the board table, which is where ultimately our policy is decided and our strategies. So that's the reality. The reality on the men's side is, you know, is 23rd is being at the World Cup overachieving, given the pro league we don't have in our country up until you know, months ago with the Pride and Bill Webb, sorry, the Pride, and Bill Webb and his team, just remarkable, the steps that he's made, he and Mark Winokur, putting in place opportunity for athletes and joining this fledgling, all hope will become what the MLS was to soccer. And that's really, if Canada has a foothold in there, their attitude to developing Canadian players, I mean, I don't think we can ever overestimate the importance of that. So on the men's side, it's only recently we've had that. Only recently we brought back a program like the Pride, where the athletes are really invested in properly. Club ball, playing provincial after Europe, playing pro ball, and playing for Canada in World Cups. There's some big steps there, some big gaps that the gaps are so much bigger that need to be made up now. Even for Chauncey and Jeb, you know, when they came through 15, you know, 20 years ago, those are gaps that are way bigger now in terms of the physical, in terms of the skill development, in terms of the level of competition. You got to make up those gaps, and let's hope you know, we can keep growing on that. But there are certain realities as to how much money we have to spend to close those gaps, and we can do with the money we have, the match opportunities we have. Someone like Kingsley Jones has to pick and choose between what the ideal model is and how we would produce the best possible results for Canada, and what we do. The reality is of what we have to spend and the competition we have available to us.
Yeah, it makes sense. Everything you kind of talked about leads to the last question here. What is the importance of culture in Canadian rugby? What is the Canadian culture of rugby in Canada? Like, what can you explain to our listeners?
Well, the gaps I just mentioned are probably not going to go away, whether five and see it on TV every night and have this clearly defined pathway to the NHL.
Yeah,
don't have that, and our distance from the best players in the world, whether it's in Europe or in the Southern Hemisphere, you know, those are realities we're not gonna change. So when you have a culture, when you have believes in itself, that really has an identity, you can make up for a lot of those gaps. I witnessed that. I played in teams that got to quarterfinals of World Cup, that beat top 10 teams in the world. And a lot of that commitment to each other, that notion of culture and of there being a bigger calling, i.e. that red jersey, you can make up a lot of those things. That's why to see Jamie Cup, these athletes, you know, taking the lessons he learned in Europe and in a Canadian jersey, Adam Kleberger is helping him out now, to see those guys who have been there on the men's side, and then instilling that and making those demands current young players. That to me is we're rebuilding that culture. Obviously Kingsley's overseeing that. He, even though he's a Welshman, you know, undersized, nasty little cheating flanker that he was as a player, he for a lot of maybe some physical discrepancies he had as a player, and as a leader. He captained his nation. No, let's not forget, one of the greatest rugby nations in the world. He made up for a lot of that passion, his commitment to his teammates, his doggedness, and his ability to just compete as hard as possible. And so that he's now in place. And on the women's side, we have people like Kelly Russell who have shown that on the field. John Tate, who's been a champion for the women's game. These, and who obviously wore the Canadian jersey and played at pro in Europe. These people are now leading. They get what it takes to get there. They understand some of the gaps you got to make up when you play for Canada. So I think it's important that we continue to invest in them, but also recognize it that if we're play off the field, if we're acting like we're some other kind of athlete that has unlimited funding, and we're not doing the work, being respectful of the game, then we're not going to be as good as we can be. As leaders, whether it's someone in my position or as a leadership role, whether it's the coaches, whether it's club coaches or regional rep coaches, we all have that responsibility to make our kids, our young players, make sure they're living proper rugby values, because they're only going to be as good as they can be if they address those values and treat the game with respect and work.
Yeah, character's at the utmost importance by the sounds of it.
And that's the word that sums it up, right? And
yeah.
Rugby, a great quote from my dad always, rugby doesn't build character, it reveals character.
Yeah.
And I do think our game had this opportunity, a team game in this world of kids hooked to devices and screens. There's a provide for the team in order for anyone to have individual success. And again, I know it's this hokey kind of philosophy we all have, but sometimes we need to say it and we need to live in it. And then the character does get revealed. Who can perform in that environment. And you know, I'm a father of 2 young boys, 8 and 9 years old. They're not particularly sporty at the moment, but I would love that they took those values from any game they played. Hopefully rugby, not, you know, that you got to be there for the person beside you, and how are you going to contribute to the bigger cause. And you know, that's to me is why I think rugby is special and it's different than a lot of other games.
I couldn't have said that any better. That's awesome. Any last thoughts? Anything you'd like listeners to know about Rugby Canada, about you, about rugby in general?
Well, Brunswick there, you know, I've had the fortune to coach, play, administer right across this country. In every province I've coached, obviously both genders, boys, girls, everyone. And from it still blows me away that across this country, there's people that are invested in our game, that love what they got from the game and are putting it back. And, you know, to find the next great players, we're going to need everyone working hard at club level, at regional level. And I'm very, very proud when I get to travel the world. Now I'm doing some work in the commentary booth. And, you know, it's a different, the respect that Canadian rugby has for who we are off the field and the challenges we face, we don't back down from. Those are moments I'm most proud of. Obviously, I've won some big games over the years. I've been and was able to score a lot of points and have success with pro teams. But it's really that essence of when you walk into a room where you're not the most famous guy in there, but all these famous All Blacks players or French players go, oh yeah, I remember you. And there's that sign of respect, like you guys were tough to play against. And by the way, let's have a beer because I also like you as a person.
Yeah.
To me, that's what Canadian rugby is, and long may it continue. You know, I've been blessed to be a part of that, and it's really been a privilege.
That's awesome. Well, listen, I don't want to take up any more of your time. This has been a pleasure for us at Canadian Rock, and I just want to say thank you very much for what you did for our country playing and what you're continuing to do for our country as a member of Rugby Canada.
Well, thank you, and thanks for bringing some voice to some of the great stories you guys have been putting out there. More of this, we gotta hear our own stories and hopefully celebrate them. But appreciate you giving me the time and the chance to blab on like an old man. Oh, my web series was Fleabag, which is awesome from England. Anyways, Fleabag, check it out.
Sounds good. Thanks, Gareth.
Cheers.
Just like to say hats off to Gareth for joining us on this pod. Some great stories there, great thoughts on the game in Canada. Always a pleasure to talk to a legend of the game like Gareth. Gareth's now, he's out in BC, living with his family, doing the COVID thing, living the self-isolated life, spending some great quality time with his family. He's currently Director of Commercial and Rugby Relations for Rugby Canada. just an amazing player, great rugby mind, and a true character guy and full class gentleman all the way around. Coming up soon on the Canadian Ruck, we have Brad Mayday May of the Buffalo Sabres. Brad, if you haven't known, Brad played high school rugby. He played provincial under 15, I believe, and he also knows Gareth Rees, and he talks about how much he enjoyed watching Rugby Sevens tournament out in BC this year, thanks to Nathan Hirayama for the tickets. We also have a couple of ladies from the St. John Irish that are going to do a nice standalone about local legends. Our first Super Rugby Roundtable is coming up with some Chiefs players. We got Tyler Ardrum back along with Sam Kane and Lachlan Bozier. We also have coming up soon Magali Harvey, won World Rugby Player of the Year back in 2014. And we also have coach of Team Canada, Kingsley Joan, and Pacific Pride coach, Jamie Cudmore, coming up eventually too. And following that, we're going to have another Super Rugby Chiefs Roundtable again with Tyler. And we're going to have Damien McKenzie and Anton Leonard Brown on. Plus, we have many more coming up after that too. We've got about 20 people that have all confirmed to be on the pod. It's pretty exciting. Again, as always, I'd like to say massive thanks to the doctors, nurses, all the frontline healthcare professionals, and all others who are still working during the COVID. Hats off to you all. Again, like to give our condolences to what happened in Nova Scotia about a week ago. Sad times. We spoke about it before on a previous Luck with the Blau Rovers, but definitely our hearts and our prayers and our thoughts are still with all of you fine folks in Nova Scotia dealing with this senseless tragedy. As always, like to thank Ben Sound Music for supplying us with their tunes. And if you have a chance, feel free to request topics. Send us feedback on any past or possible future podcasts. And until next time, this is Jamie. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay sane, and keep on rocking.